In the coastal town of Nakweli, Lara woke before sunrise with a small laugh in her throat, the kind that comes from quiet joy. She slipped into her best dress and imagined Semo smiling the way he used to. She thought their anniversary would be a soft, simple evening, maybe dinner by the harbor, maybe a dance if the band in Tavoli Square was playing. So when Semo said there would be a surprise at the community hall, she felt a flutter of excitement, never noticing how his eyes didn't meet hers. The hall in Keller district was bright and full of familiar faces, but something felt wrong the moment she stepped inside. People looked away too quickly. Even her closest friends pretended to fix their clothes instead of greeting her. She tried to laugh it off, telling herself maybe it was part of the surprise. Then Semo stood up and said he wanted to separate, his voice loud enough to echo off every wall. Laro felt the sound hit her chest before the meaning did. She tried to breathe, tried to understand, but the room had already pulled back from her like a tide. She walked out without saying another word, her hands shaking as she wandered the harbor until the moon rose. Later, in a Braleni courtroom, she found strength she didn't know she had. When the judge announced that Semo had unknowingly signed all their assets to her, she didn't feel triumph, only a slow return to herself. She stepped outside into warm sunlight, letting the breeze from the coast wash over her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt her heart steady. When Laro and Semo reached the community hall in Keller district, she was still holding on to the tiny spark of joy she'd carried since morning. She had imagined soft music, shared smiles, maybe a few jokes about how far they'd come since their early days in Little Nakweli. But the moment the doors opened, something inside her paused. The lights were bright enough to sting her eyes, and the room was full, every table crowded with faces she knew. Yet the air felt tight, like everyone had been holding their breath long before she entered. She walked in beside Semo, trying to match his pace, but he moved with a strange stiffness, almost like he didn't want their shoulders to touch. Laro noticed the first whisper near the far table, then another near the stage, soft enough that she couldn't hear the words, only the tone. She saw Lemani look away quickly, pretending to adjust her scarf. Jabo, who always greeted her with jokes, suddenly bent over his plate as if studying something important. Even the Mabani twins, who normally ran up to her shouting her name, stayed glued to their mother's side. Laro tried to smile at them, but the smile didn't last long. Something in her chest warned her that this night wasn't what she hoped. She reached for Semo's arm just to feel grounded, but he stepped forward before her hand touched him. She told herself not to worry, that maybe the surprise he promised needed this large crowd. Maybe everyone was simply trying not to spoil it. She even laughed under her breath, telling herself she was being dramatic. She sat beside him at the head table, smoothing her dress with her palms to hide how cold they'd suddenly become. Every so often she looked at him, waiting for him to give her one reassuring smile, one small sign that she was safe. But he stared ahead, jaw tight, fingers tapping a slow rhythm against the table. The room kept buzzing in low murmurs, flickering glances, nervous shifting. Laro felt as if she were standing on a stage without knowing her lines. She tried to catch the eye of her friend Sarika, but Sarika looked away so fast it felt like a slap. That was the moment the fear settled in her stomach. Something was coming, and she wasn't prepared for it. She leaned towards Semo, whispering his name, asking softly if everything was all right. He didn't look at her. He only said, in a voice that didn't sound like his own, that he would explain soon. The words didn't comfort her. They felt like a door closing. She sat very still after that, listening to the clatter of plates and chairs, the thick silence under it all. She wished she could slip outside for a moment of air, but she didn't want to draw attention. She told herself to be patient, to trust the man she had loved for years, the man she woke up smiling for that very morning. But with every passing second in that bright, tense hall, she felt the ground beneath her feet shift little by little, as if the night itself was preparing to break her open. Semo rose from his chair so suddenly that Laro thought he was about to start the speech she'd been waiting for. the one she hoped would explain the strange mood in the hall. She even let out a small, nervous laugh, thinking maybe this was the moment when everything would finally make sense. But then he cleared his throat, and the sound felt sharp, like it didn't belong to the man she knew. The crowd quieted. Chairs stopped moving. Even the lights seemed louder. Laro watched him with a hopeful smile that faded the moment he said he wanted a separation. At first she didn't understand the words. They floated in the air, too heavy to land. Then he added that she was holding him back, that she wasn't the partner he imagined. The hall erupted in a single wave of gasps, and Laro felt her heart slam against her ribs. It was as if someone had pulled the ground from under her feet. She stood there, trembling, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress, trying to keep her hands from shaking too visibly. She managed to whisper his name, asking why, what had changed, what she had done. He didn't let her finish. He raised his hand slightly as if dismissing her and said the decision was final. His voice was cold in a way she had never heard before. The silence that followed was painful, almost crushing. People stared at her with wide eyes, some with pity, others with curiosity, all of them witnessing her heart fracture in real time. She felt like she was standing in a storm without shelter, waiting for the next blow. She could hear her own breathing, shallow and shaky, louder than the heavy quiet in the hall. She wanted to sit down, to disappear, to run outside before the tears spilled over, but her legs wouldn't move. Her throat burned. Her eyes stung. She thought of the morning, of waking with hope, of choosing her dress carefully, of humming to herself as she pictured Semo's smile. Now that memory felt like something from another life. Someone at a nearby table whispered her name softly, but she couldn't turn her head. She felt frozen, trapped inside a moment that didn't seem real. She could see Semo looking anywhere but at her, refusing to see the pain he caused. She realized then that she had lost him long before this night, and he had simply chosen the cruelest way to let her know. A faint buzzing filled her ears, and the hall grew distant, blurred, as if she were underwater. She finally forced herself to breathe, slow and deep, holding on to whatever strength was left inside her. She didn't cry in front of them. She didn't collapse. She stood tall, even as her heart shattered, and she walked out of the hall without a word, leaving behind the man she thought she knew and the night that had broken her open. Laro pushed open the hall doors with hands that didn't feel like her own, aware of every pair of eyes following her. The bright lights behind her made her shadow stretch long on the dirt path, and for a moment she felt like she was walking away from her own life. The night air outside was colder than she expected, sharp enough to make her gasp. She wrapped her arms around herself, not to stay warm but to hold all the pieces of her heart in place before they scattered across the ground. She walked without thinking, her heels clicking on the stone road as if trying to keep up with the rush inside her chest. She passed the shops of Keller District, their lanterns flickering softly, the world around her strangely calm for a night that had shattered her from the inside out. When she reached Nakweli Harbor, the sea greeted her with its steady breathing, waves pushing and pulling like a giant heartbeat. She sat on a low wall, then stood again because sitting felt too still, too heavy. So she walked and walked and walked until her legs burned. Each step felt like a question she couldn't answer. Why had he chosen the loudest room, the fullest hall, the one place where she could not hide? Why had he turned their anniversary into a wound she would carry for years? She tried to replay the night, searching for signs she might have missed, but the memories tangled together until they hurt too much to hold. A soft laugh escaped her, but it wasn't from humor. It was the kind of laugh that rises when a person can't believe how deeply the world has changed in a single hour. She touched her face and felt tears she didn't remember starting. The shame stung more than the cold. She imagined the whispers already spreading through town, imagined her name passing from mouth to mouth like a piece of gossip. She hated that, not because she wanted people to admire her, but because she had lived her life quietly, kindly, and she didn't deserve to be broken open for an audience. The thought of Semo's voice still echoed in her mind, that sharp tone he used, the one that made her feel like a burden instead of a partner. She stopped walking and leaned against a post near the boats, staring at her reflection in the dark water. She barely recognized the woman looking back, tired eyes, shaking shoulders, a soul trying to stay upright. But she wasn't finished. A small, steady voice inside her reminded her that she still had dignity, even if Semo tried to strip it from her. She straightened, wiped her face, and took a slow breath. She couldn't change what he had done, but she could choose how she faced what came next, and he would not get to control that part. She decided she would meet him in court, not to hurt him, not to win anything, simply to stand up for herself, to protect whatever pieces of her life she still held. With that quiet promise, she turned away from the harbor and began the long walk home, guiding herself by the faint light of the sea. Weeks later, when Laro stepped into the courthouse in Braleni City, she felt smaller than she ever had in her life. The tall stone pillars, the echoing footsteps, the heavy wooden doors all seemed to press down on her at once. She sat at her table, hands clenched together, trying to slow her breathing. She had barely slept the night before, lying awake in her tiny room above Aunt Rona's shop, listening to the quiet hum of the city and wondering if she had the strength to face the man who had broken her so publicly. When Semo entered, she didn't need to look up to know it was him. His walk had always been loud, full of pride, and today it carried an extra rhythm, as if he already believed the ending of this story belonged to him. He wore a crisp suit and a smile that made her chest tighten. He didn't glance at her once, not even when he passed by her table. It was as if she no longer existed, as if he had erased her the same way he tried to erase their marriage that night in the hall. Laro's advocate, Nearest, leaned close and whispered gently that she would be all right. Nearest had a calm voice, soft but steady, the kind that reminded Laro of quiet rivers after storms. She told Laro to speak with honesty, nothing more, nothing less. When the judge finally called her up, Laro's legs felt unsteady, almost like they weren't hers. The courtroom seemed too bright, too silent. She took a breath, then another, but her voice still trembled when she introduced herself. She could feel Semo's confidence behind her, like a shadow stretching across the floor. At first, the words stuck in her throat. She tried to describe the hall, the lights, the whispers, but her voice cracked. For a moment she feared she would fall apart right there in front of everyone, just as she had in Keller District. Then she remembered the cold night at Nakweli Harbor, the way she had walked until her legs shook, and how she had promised herself she would not collapse again. So she lifted her chin. She let the memories come, one by one, and she told them aloud. She explained how she had walked into the hall expecting love and instead found humiliation. She repeated Semo's words exactly, even the ones that still burned. She spoke about the silence that swallowed her, the stares, the way her heart felt like it had shattered in front of strangers. The more she spoke, the steadier she became. Her voice grew stronger, her hands stopped shaking, and somewhere inside her, a new kind of strength began to rise. She didn't look at Semo once. She kept her eyes on the judge, telling the truth as simply as she could, letting the courtroom feel the weight of what she carried. And when she finally stepped down, she felt breath return to her chest in a way she hadn't felt since the night everything fell apart. The courtroom felt heavy after all the talking, as if every word spoken that morning had sunk into the wooden floor. Laro sat with her palms flat on the table, trying to keep herself steady as the judge asked for the final documents. Semo stood up with the same proud stride he had used when he walked in, shoulders high, chin lifted, already imagining a victory that seemed almost certain to him. He passed his folder forward with a small, confident nod, the kind he used to give when he believed he was ahead of everyone else. Nearest rose next, moving slower, calmer, her expression unreadable. She didn't try to match Semo's energy. She simply handed her papers to the clerk as if she knew the truth didn't need to shout to be powerful. Lara watched her with quiet trust, though her heart thudded hard enough to shake her ribs. The judge began reading through the documents, flipping pages quickly at first, then slower, then stopping altogether. He narrowed his eyes at one sheet, leaned closer, then sat back in his chair with a long breath that made the whole room shift. People leaned forward. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hum more softly. The judge looked at Semo, then at Laro, then at the paper again before speaking in a voice that sliced through the silence. According to his own signature, all marital assets already belonged to Mrs. Laro. For a moment the room didn't react at all. It was as if no one understood what had just been said. Then whispers burst across the courtroom like a wave rolling over sand. Laro's ears rang. Semo's face drained of color, turning pale as dust. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out, only a small strained sound. Laro blinked once, twice, trying to place the memory that suddenly flashed in her mind. A night months ago. Semo handing her a paper, telling her it was a travel consent form for a trip he planned. She remembered laughing lightly as she signed, teasing him about planning trips without telling her the details. She remembered him signing too, distracted, tapping his foot the way he did when he wasn't paying attention. And now that absent-minded signature had given everything to her. She sat in shock, her hands no longer steady on the table. The judge continued speaking, explaining the legal transfer, confirming that every property, every account, every shared asset had been placed under her name by Semo himself. She barely heard the rest. It felt unreal, like the world had tilted, and she was only now trying to understand the new angle. Semo finally found his voice, trying to argue, trying to claim confusion, but the judge held up a hand and the room fell silent again. His own signature speaks for itself. Laro watched Semo sink back slightly, pride slipping from him like sand through fingers. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She only sat there stunned, feeling the weight of a life she never expected to hold alone. And beneath the shock, beneath the whirlwind around her, she felt something else rising slowly inside her chest. A quiet sense that the world, for once, had seen her. When the judge began listing the final orders, the courtroom went so quiet Laro could hear her own breathing again. He said she would retain the home in Nakweli, the savings they had built over 4 years, and even the small land plot in Zibu that Semo used to brag about as if it were a kingdom. Each word felt unreal, almost distant, like someone else's story being read aloud. She sat very still, afraid that moving even a little would wake her from whatever miracle had just unfolded. Semo finally broke the silence, his voice cracking as he tried to explain himself, saying he hadn't meant to sign anything, that it was all a mistake, that Laro couldn't possibly deserve all of it. But the judge raised a hand, calm and firm, and told him the matter was settled. Semo's mouth opened again, but nothing came out this time except a small stutter, as if the confidence he carried into the room had slipped out through the cracks in his voice. Laro watched him struggle, watched him grasp for reasons and excuses, watched the proud posture he walked in with collapse little by little. This was the same man who had stood in a crowded hall and made her feel like she was nothing. Now he looked smaller, unsure, stripped of the certainty he always wore like armor. She didn't feel joy in seeing him fall. That wasn't the kind of woman she was. She simply felt a strange, quiet calm spreading through her chest. For the first time since that terrible night, her heartbeat no longer raced from fear or shame. It moved steadily, like a drum finding its rhythm again. Semo kept glancing at her, as if hoping she would save him somehow, as if the woman he humiliated in front of an entire community would suddenly defend him now. She held his gaze for only a moment, not with anger, but with a kind of final understanding. She didn't owe him anything anymore. The truth had done what she never could. It had revealed every crack he tried to hide. When the judge dismissed the hearing, people began whispering again, but this time the whispers didn't sting. Nearest touched Laro's hand and gave a small nod, proud but gentle, the kind of silent support Laro wished she'd had the night her world fell apart. She stood slowly, feeling her feet firm beneath her. As she walked past Semo, he lowered his eyes, unable to meet hers. The power he once held over her had dissolved in a single morning, washed away by his own choices. Outside the courtroom, the sunlight of Braleni City felt warm on her face. She paused on the steps, letting it soak into her skin, letting the noise of the street rise around her like a living heartbeat. She didn't know exactly what her future looked like now, but she felt something she hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Her life was hers again, and she was finally ready to carry it forward. Laro stepped out of the courthouse and paused on the wide steps, letting the warm Braleni sunlight wash over her face. For a moment she just stood there, eyes closed, feeling the quiet rise inside her like a tide, finally calming after a long storm. It wasn't the ruling that made her feel light. It was the simple truth that someone had finally listened to her, seen her, believed her. As she walked toward the street, her phone buzzed again and again. Messages from Nakweli. Old neighbors, friends who had looked away that night in the hall, people she barely spoke to anymore. They apologized for their silence, for watching her break without stepping forward. Some told her they wished they had hugged her as she walked out. Others said they had never forgotten the look on her face that night. Their words didn't erase the wound, but they softened something inside her she didn't expect to loosen. She caught a ride back to Nakweli and walked the rest of the way home, passing the harbor where she had once wandered until her legs shook. The air smelled of salt and roasted maize from a vendor nearby, and the world felt strangely new, as if someone had washed it clean. When she reached her small house, she unlocked the door and opened all the windows wide. The sea breeze moved through the rooms, lifting the curtains and brushing against her skin like a gentle greeting. She walked from room to room slowly, touching the backs of chairs, running her fingers along the cool wooden walls, feeling the space as if it were her own heartbeat. She didn't smile because Semo had fallen. She smiled because she had risen. She sat near the window, breathed in the ocean air. And for the first time in a long time, her breath came without fear, steady and full, as if her life had finally made room for her again.